Very well. So welcome again to everyone. This is Coach Connect, and Coach Connect is a once a month event that ICF San Antonio offers to get together and just talk about coaching topics. We started this during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, just to get together and feel a sense of community. And we chose some topics that we could all feel we could relate to. And they began as conversations, and this evolved into inviting guests as well as member coaches to share some interesting ideas and concepts of topics or specialties that they work on. And so today, instead of a live session, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to try for the very first time a rebroadcast of a really, really good Coach Connect event we had last March, which is entitled A Conversation about Workplace Bullying and Toxic Environments. And yesterday, I had a presentation with a group of people and the whole conversation revolved around managing conflict in the workplace. And, you know, what a perfect segue, because this happens more often than we wish it did. So Coach Connect, our once a month events, we do this on the last Tuesday of the month. Everyone is welcome, and they're totally free for everyone. We also record these because we upload them to YouTube and SoundCloud. So they're available to you after this event in the form of podcast. If you are uncomfortable with the recording, please let us know or send an email to contact@icfsa.org. Moving right along. Some other things that we have at ICF San Antonio that I would like to make Elena and Andy aware of is that we have a peer coaching program. And what this is coaches coach other coaches who are members of the chapters. And so far, everybody I've been talking to about peer coaching is thrilled and is really, really excited about the member that they've been paired up with. And so if you are interested in participating in peer coaching, please let us know. And we'll give you more information about this. Also, if you're interested in learning more about our chapter, we have a membership benefits and network event every month, and it's the first Thursday of the month at 6 p.m. It's just a 30-40 minute event where everybody is welcome to attend, and we'll just chat about what we're doing, show you to our website, talk to you a little bit about our theme and how we support our coaches in our community and how we promote coaching in the greater San Antonio area. The next one is at the beginning of August 4th, I believe. More on this at the end of our session today. So again, our rebroadcast today is a conversation on workplace bullying and toxic environments. And this is presented by Sue Mann, who is a PCC. And what she's going to talk to us about is how toxic relationships and bullying in the workplace affect us in many aspects of our lives, not just at work. And, but they also provide us with an opportunity to grow. These relationships can make us feel stuck, disempowered, at a loss. And it's hard to focus on tasks and be our best selves under these circumstances. So without further ado, I'm going to start the recording. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and go to a different screen. So please bear with me just a second. And I'm going to start the recording right now. Here we go. Here we go.
All righty. Thank you so much, ICF San Antonio. It's great to be here. Thank you, thank you. And guess what? No slides today. This is not a presentation. It is truly a conversation. So I am really looking forward to getting those questions from you. You coaches, you know how to ask questions, so bring them. You probably have all had some experience or know of this phenomenon, and what is it meant to you, and what does it mean when you have clients that you're working with who might be experiencing this. But you probably want to know a little bit about me first. I got my PCC 2 months ago. Yes. Very satisfied, and before that I still am a board certified coach as well, but ICF is definitely home. Like so many of us, my path into coaching was not one I ever anticipated. I never in my life thought I would be a coach. How I came to do this is probably not unexpectedly, not surprisingly to anyone. I had my own experience of workplace bullying. That was 2017. It was horrific. Full on PTSD, mental health, nervous breakdown. Couldn't move off the couch for 2 months. Suicidal ideation, hospitalization. Yeah, it was a trip. And before everyone came on, Roger and I were also talking about the concept of post-traumatic growth. So there's PTSD, or many ways I prefer to call it PTS, post-traumatic stress injury, rather than a disorder. I am also a certified community resilience model from the Trauma Resource Institute. So I'm very much a trauma-informed coach, because the work I do, I really need to be. There's so much trauma involved with workplace bullying. But there's also post-traumatic growth, and I experienced that. It was kind of my phrase from when I did my talk at Cornell University was, I broke down to break open. So the breaking down is really a breaking open. And I sort of finally shed the lifetime of that armor, those of you who know Brene Brown, all that armor that I was wearing, and just experienced the most sort of profound spiritual growth, who I am, what I am, courage, compassion. I haven't stayed on that high quite as much as I would have liked to, but I have experienced it. And it was really from that I was like, which is not an uncommon thing at all for people who have experienced, gone through very traumatic experiences, to become advocates, activists, and advocacy people. And so, workplace bullying is very much what brought me into coaching and what I want to help people with. I also am a contract coach for BetterUp. Some of you might know BetterUp, some of you might not. I enjoy that a lot. And interestingly, because BetterUp mostly does bringing coaching at scale into organizations. So mostly it has organizational contracts. And I would get occasionally people through there who were clearly coming in because of their toxic environment. But now BetterUp has also launched a BetterUp Direct, which is a way for people to just subscribe onto the BetterUp platform without having to have an organizational contract in place. And it's been fascinating, because a lot more people now are approaching me through that one, because I very specifically put workplace bullying. I'm a survivor and a thriver post-bullying. Not that I've gone back into corporate. I've always said I never want to have a boss again after that experience, but I get to coach people on having bosses and being bosses. So look, maybe it's hypocrisy, but anyway, it's what works for me. I love being self-employed. And probably people want to know where the accent is from. It's South African. I grew up in South Africa, apartheid South Africa. It's very much part of my story as to why I landed up ultimately being bullied and why I was susceptible to PTSD. And I served as a diplomat for 8 years, the first democratic South African administration. I was in the Foreign Service with President Nelson Mandela. It was an amazing ride. Was there for 8 years and 6 years in the Middle East. So there's also that in my past. So that's a little bit about the accent and how I come to be here. So to kick us off with a conversation, I think I'd probably just like to start with, well, what is workplace bullying? How do we define this thing? And does it differ from toxic environments, toxic workplaces or not? There is no single definition of workplace bullying. It's a phenomenon that has been studied. It's being studied across the globe. It was the British who actually first really coined the word workplace bullying. Before that, it had primarily been called mobbing. And this is coming out of the Scandinavian researchers. And it was the Workplace Bullying Institute that really brought that term into the United States in sort of the mid-1990s. So there is no singular definition. All researchers using a slightly different definition. But there's some hallmarks that are common across all definitions. So the one I use, and my wording is quite intentional here, is that bullying is a dehumanizing process that is all about power and control. It's abusive conduct that denies the humanity of the other, or diminishes or denies the humanity of the other person. And it causes profound health harm at great cost to the organization. We're probably all familiar with Amy Edmondson's psychological safety concept, and how the presence of psychological safety leads to organizations that are far more innovative, adaptive, compassionate, far higher productivity, performance, all of that stuff. So a toxic work environment is one I would describe as having low or no psychological safety. But the threat is a little generalized. Bullying, it's targeted, it's specific. There is a specific threat targeted at a specific person. It feels very personal. So where there is bullying, there is no psychological safety. But you may have an environment of low psychological safety, but you still don't have bullying. And I've certainly been working with people who are in low psychological safety, but there isn't bullying. It's where they just don't, there's a general sense of distrust, micromanagement, but it's not sort of rising to the level of bullying. That psychological aggression is called, psychological abuse. It's psychological violence. It really is. And the people who work in workplace bullying, the analogy we usually try and draw on is this is domestic violence happening in the workplace, but now the abuser's on the payroll. And you're having to show up every day to get the abuse, to get the paycheck. And I think when you think about it that way, you can start to sort of get a sense of how profoundly different it is from just a toxic work environment, but how profoundly health harming it is. And when I'm coaching someone at the moment, she's the owner of she's one of 5 owners of an organization in Canada. And she's about to sit down and have a conversation with the bully. And I put that in air quotes quite intentionally. You can talk about that. And she's about to sort of express just what I was coaching her to really be very specific about the impacts that this gentleman's behavior has been having. And I just lost my train of thought there oh my gosh, I completely lost my train of thought there. I was coaching her about that talking about the impacts, the well-being, the focus, the sleep, the blood pressure, the ability to make decisions, the morale and health and well-being. It's not about hurt feelings. It's not about personality conflict, because I think this is a lot of what it's like. It's about personalities conflicting. No, it's like we don't talk about personality conflicts in a domestic violence situation. It's abuse. And this is what's going on as well. So with that, I'm going to stop and take questions. I really want to direct this and have a conversation. What's coming up for you as you hear this definition? What's your experience of this? We can talk about how do you coach this. We can talk about the profile of targets, the profile of the actors. I don't call them bullies. That's very intentional. We can talk about organizational constructs. Honestly, it's where would you like to go with this conversation? So I'll stop and check in with everybody. Oh, and just before you do that, I know a lot of people have their cameras turned off, and that's totally okay. But as someone who's conversing with you, it's really lovely if I can see about 50% of faces. At least I feel a little more connected in. So if you do feel willing and able to turn your camera on, it would be lovely. But I also totally recognize that, you know, you might be cameraed out. Totally fine. Might not want. So anyway, just if you can, I would love it, but I also understand if not.
Sue, thank you for a wonderful introduction. I wanted to ask if you could share with these coaches a little bit more about the differentiation that you described in an organization, where you talked about in the organization there's some micromanaging, which is very different from psychological aggression. Can you expand some more on that?
There are different modes of bullying. Active threat and sort of passive threat. Microaggression, I mean, not microaggressions, but micromanaging in and of itself may not be bullying. It's sort of how bad is it? But when it's coupled with sort of demeaning language, when it's coupled with particularly withholding of resources and information, then it's starting to move out of just being like awful management to being having that impact. I mean, micromanaging by itself, if we still largely feel safe with a person, it's just annoying. But when we do, but it is absolutely a tactic that can be used by the actors, but we won't feel safe with them in other ways. We will feel profoundly threatened and sort of destabilized by the entire management approach, that we can do nothing right. Because there's a stickler, right? Someone who's just a stickler. But then there's the I can do nothing right for this person. If I do it that way, they want it this way. If I do it that way, then they keep on changing the rules. The goalposts keep moving. I can never do anything right. I'm not allowed to make any decisions for myself ever. I'm questioned. You know, I feel like there's someone like over my shoulder the entire time. That is when it's starting to edge a little bit out of just like being toxic and what have you, into actually potentially being health harming. But to the point of, this is what I think is so hard for people to understand, and this is from a trauma-informed lens. Just because it doesn't look like bullying to you doesn't mean it's not bullying to them. It's an innately, in trauma, we know that trauma is innately subjective. And so we will say with bullying is, if there is no harmful impact, it's not bullying. It's just offensive behavior. It might be irritating, annoying, offensive behavior that we don't like, don't enjoy, don't want. But it's when it is starting to have that profound harm on our sense of self, our identity, who we are. Now it's becoming bullying. Does that answer your question, Aurora?
Yes, thank you. I have it there as people start listening to some experiences perhaps that they've had, and the fact that you're providing this framework helps people understand what's happening. It's like a spider web that is being built, and the spider controls who comes in and out, and when or how they get devoured, which is an awful metaphor, but that is in alignment with what you just said about this offensive behavior. And when it causes profound harm on the sense of self. So ask questions. Maybe if people want to come on and ask questions, I will ask another question, and that is tactics. Go back to that metaphor, the spider, and they kind of start hitting the string on the web to make the fly think that there's food, right? Mm-hmm. But what are some of the tactics that individuals use when they are creating this atmosphere of an offensive behavior? Give us an example of what that looks like.
Yelling at you, aggressively leaning into your space, sabotaging your work, withholding information and resources from you, then blaming you for not knowing something, not telling you about a meeting, isolating you, excluding you, enlisting support, denigrating you outside so that you become pariah, routinely blaming and criticizing you, always insisting on getting their own way, never apologizing, taking no responsibility for their own behavior, frequently being impatient, treating you like you're incompetent, spreading rumors, lies, and half-truths, denying them, and then denying them, ridiculing you, calling you names either to your face or behind your face, playing tricks on you, somebody comes into a meeting and that nasty trick, and everybody's silent treatment, non-responsiveness, emotional outbursts, the anger, making up rules on the fly, changing the rules on the fly, ignoring you, just never returning a greeting. Can I go on? It's like the list is like the tactics are as endless as them. It can be, yeah. But you're starting to get a flavor of they're all tactics that make you feel, and this is where I use dehumanizing, they make you feel like you're a less than human being. So offense. Gaslighting is gaslighting is, I didn't say that. No, you read me wrong. I didn't. You misunderstood. Oh, why are you feeling that way? You're too sensitive. I never, like the gaslighting it's crazy making. It's completely crazy making. I'm also keeping an eye on the chat.
Yes, that's good. Sue, you've described some really powerful tactics that the if we call them abuser or the actor that is causing harm.
I prefer either the person bullying you, the bullying behavior. I don't want to call the bully the bully. I know it feels sometimes a little tortured, but if I do that, I'm doing exactly what they're doing to someone else. I am saying what their identity is. I am saying who they are, and I am diminishing their humanity just that little bit more. Now, I absolutely, totally respect the right of people who are targets, just like someone who's been raped, to call the person who raped them the rapist. That is so important. We cannot take that away. But especially, it's like in the work I do, it's so important. And I have worked with people who have been called bullies. There's a reason why they're doing what they're doing. There has often been significant trauma and adversity in their past. They have grown up in a society, that taught them certain role models. Then they've come into a culture that is aggressive. It's about performance. It's about meeting tasks. It's about meeting those objectives. Don't particularly care, how you do it. It's like that ruthless corporate competitive culture will bring the worst out of anybody. And so just a word there on terminology. That's why I really try and not use the word bully. There is one group of people, though, I haven't ever been asked to work with, and I hope I never do. They're called the dark triad personality. This is your psychopath, Machiavellian, narcissist. Even the therapists will hate like you can get nothing to stick to these people. And we had a recent experience with one of those in this country for quite a while. Many people would say. So yeah,
for 4 years.
Yes, something like that. So yes, I have landed up coaching someone who actually said he had been diagnosed as a narcissist. He was a perfectly lovely man who was trying really hard to overcome stuff, but but he had this awareness, and he knew where it was coming from, and he was willing to work with it. So I'm willing to work with him too. Yeah. So we went on a tangent there around what do we call people?
If you can't call them the term bully, how does one approach addressing what they're doing? Does one just say the person who's doing such and such an action, or having such and such an effect on the group, or how do you?
Bullying? It's bullying behavior.
Okay, so we don't label them. We basically address their behavior.
The behavior. And we talk about, and the impact of that behavior is it shuts people down. It makes them feel unsafe. And that's profoundly bad for the organization, because if you want productive employees, what do you need? You need happy, engaged employees who feel safe and respected. So bullying works directly against an organization's interests. Oh, but guess who organizations typically promote and reward? You know, the people engaging in this aggressive behavior, because they're masters of kiss up, kick down. Is the quick way of saying it. Usually the people bullying are not seen at all that way by management or the people they're reporting up to. They're seen as, go-getters, performers, achievers, who get stuff done. They're very likable. And our management very often isn't even aware that this is going on. And then if it's brought to their attention, they don't even believe it.
So you've described some really powerful tactics that people who create a work environment that is not positive, they have ways to sabotage people's identities and purposes. But as coaches, how do we build that in? Like, what is a tactic that you can share with us as coaches as we coach individuals with these mindsets?
And are you thinking of the people who are bullying or the people who are in the receiving end of the bullying?
That is a great question. Perhaps if we could unpack both perspectives.
Let's start with the targets, because we call them targets, not victims. Validate, 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 validate. Believe them. But the funny thing is, they might not even call it bullying, because there is so much shame associated with it. I had it just the other day. I'd been coaching someone for 6 months, and we were coaching all around the issue. Wanting to be more assertive, wanting more executive presence, wanting more confidence. And only after about 4 months did we get into how profoundly unsafe she felt with her supervisor. And I sort of then, and I was like, that caution between, do you put an idea in someone's head versus are you validating? I said, this almost sounds like it might feel like bullying to you. How does that sound? Yes. It's like having it named for people. So they might, just understanding, they might come to you for every other reason under the sun than calling it bullying, because they don't want to name it. But listen carefully, use those coaching skills to ask, and then when appropriate, say, hey, might this feel like bullying to you? And see how they respond, kind of. And then, sorry, someone just showed up at the door to drop a package. And then in terms of coaching, this is where coaching can get really tricky, because I think we want to jump into, in some ways, we know that it can't be, they had some role to play, right? But what is that? I mean, but it's like the blaming the victim. We might not intend it at all, but it can absolutely come up with our coaching. It's like, well, what are you responsible for here? You know, what is yours to own here? Even well-intentioned questions like that too early in the process can be profoundly problematic. And so what we really need to do is, it's the idea of no one ever shows up at work wanting to be demeaned and diminished and wanting to be treated this way. There is no provocative target. Coming back to the domestic violence or the rape analogy, in some ways we've moved sexual harassment understanding is moved far ahead of where we are in workplace bullying. But you think about all the victim shaming that we did with rape, a lot of the same stuff is happening in bullying. And we as coaches, we might not be thinking we're victim shaming or blaming at all, but we can jump too quickly to thinking, well, you know, they had to play a role here. The role they played is probably their own mindset, particularly their self-concept around who they are, their own sense of identity. They tend to be quite shame-prone, very often very high standards, but a very contingent self-esteem. They need a lot of validation, feedback, and so they don't have that sort of strong, healthy sense of self to set the boundaries. That's what they own. But they didn't cause or provoke this behavior. They didn't walk in and ask for it. And so coaching needs to be really gentle around this, to sort of let them, because as I was just blogging yesterday, if anything, targets tend to take on too much accountability. They are so conscientious in, you know, their work matters to them, that, you know, all feedback, there's got to be something in there that, you know, that you have to learn. And so they take on too much responsibility and they internalize all the stuff that's happening out there. One of the biggest jobs of coaching is getting to externalize it, to realize this is not something inside of them that is causing this or provoked it. This is behavior that's out there that other people are engaging in. So getting them to externalize that rather than internalize it. And of course, then the exact opposite is happening for, you know, the actors. They don't take enough accountability and responsibility for their behavior. It's always everybody else is to blame. Everyone else is at fault, never them. So that's coaching the target. Let me stop there, take questions, see what's coming up as we think about coaching targets, because it can feel like you're on sensitive ground, because one is.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Marlo has her hand raised. Marlo, you want to come on?
Hi there. Yeah, so first I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You said that just because it doesn't look like bullying to you doesn't mean that it doesn't look or to me feel like bullying to that individual. Mm-hmm. I think that's huge. And likewise, you know, on the other end, just because it looks like bullying to you, you know, to the point that you just made, an individual may not be at a point yet where they even realize what's being done to them. So not being a coach, I think it's really important for me as a in my position and just as a human being in general, as a violence prevention integrator. One of the things that we're responsible for is really creating a positive environment, or creating strategies to have as positive an environment as possible, so that, just like you said, folks love coming into work every day. So as a person who's not a coach, but say for instance, as a team member or someone who's responsible for putting together curriculum that kind of talks about reducing violence or helping to eliminate violence. Just like you mentioned before, psychological violence is violence as well. So that being said, what is the best way for a person, say for instance, who's not a coach, to when they see something that does look like bullying going on with one of their coworkers or someone that they have a good relationship, a good working relationship with, what is the best way for that person to address the situation with that individual?
Oh, so much heart there. The word that comes to mind is be an upstander. That, just like with everyone else, validate their experience. Be the upstander. It's, because so much of this is like coworkers and colleagues. It's like the person becomes pariah and you back away. You don't want to be tainted by association. And that's part of that isolation that makes it so hard. So being willing to support and validate the experience, being willing to speak up and out and say, hey, I found that joke offensive. Please don't do things like that. Because the target probably is completely unable to respond at time. They're feeling so shut down. Educating and awareness. It's like talking about it, we say name it to tame it, naming it. Hey, that looks like bullying to me. That's not okay here. Or just generally using your voice. Because this gets tricky. I'm thinking particularly of racial justice work. I'm trying to think this through. Targets' voices are usually silenced. They're no longer being heard. No one believes in it. And if they do speak up, the gaslighting. So as a bystander, as a friend, as a colleague, as a peer, as someone else in the organization, using your voice becomes critical, but it's not to speak for the target. It's rather to speak what you are seeing, because none of us can live someone else's experience. We can't speak for them, but we can speak with them. Am I making sense? I'm just very aware of, now what we know about the racial justice work. It's like, so when white people start, speaking for Black people, it's like that's equally as offensive. But we do want to use our voices to help the cause of anti-racism work.
Right.
So in the same way, how do we use our voices to further the cause of awareness?
I think one of the other things that you mentioned, I'm picking up on, is maybe not necessarily speaking on someone else's behalf, but if what is going on with that person feels like bullying to you, is that potentially causing a toxic work environment for you? So speaking up on not necessarily on that person's behalf, but speaking up maybe on behalf of your environment. I don't want to come into work somewhere where someone is being put down constantly, or a question is being asked, and everyone else on the team gets a response, but this one person does not. That's isolating someone, and okay. I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
And I just saw Roger's rape of, Barbara's rape of personality, rape. Oh my God, that's powerful. I am totally stealing that. I have never thought of it, put that phrase, but wow, it gets to it. Yeah, any other? Because then we can come back to more coaching the actors.
Hey, Sue, can you talk about how the unconscious bias plays into all of this?
It's like it's everywhere, right? It's everywhere, and there's so many biases that are at play here. I think one of the strongest ones is the fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error, which is the idea that anything good that happens, we must have done because of something inside of it. There are various ways it plays out. Anything good we did because of our, stable innate trait, but anything bad is because of luck or bad circumstances or someone else's fault. Anything bad, so when we see the fundamental attribution error, which is like the blaming the victim, is that if we see someone being treated this way, they must have done something to deserve it. So we see that the fundamental bias that runs through bullying is that we see personality, not system. And bullying in a workplace is always as a result of a system that tolerates it or encourages it. And we don't have bad apples. We have a rotten barrel that is rotting the apples in the barrel. And so the basic fundamental bias is we think it's about individuals and personalities. It's not. It's always about systems. Because how do we know this? As soon as the system stops rewarding, encouraging, or tolerating bullying, bullying stops. So bullying is an opportunistic behavior. As soon as the costs of bullying are higher than the rewards, the bullying stops. Who can impose the costs? Not the target, only the organization. It's the organizations truly have. But how often does HR go, oh, it's personality conflict? It's not personality conflict. I would say, drawing on my NVC work, personalities are never in conflict. Strategies to deal with difficult emotions, those can be in conflict, but personalities aren't in conflict. Mindsets, strategies to deal and offload with difficult emotions and hard stuff, those can be in conflict, but not the personality. So yeah, that to me is sort of the fundamental bias. And there are lots of others, all the other biases of how they play out, all the cognitive distortions on both sides, on both sides, for both the actor and the target. Great question.
Was there a question earlier?
Yes, if I may, I have a comment actually, and I found a way to change my name. As you can see, there is an option next to my name. So I wanted to thank you, Sue, for bringing up the system, because this is critical to know that bullying is not happening in a vacuum. And I speak from experience, because I was in one of my past organizations, co-lead with another colleague, one of two co-leads on the anti-bullying task force for many years. And I know that bullying comes often from the top. If it's not that the top guy is, and let me call him a bully, if it's not that the top guy himself is a bully, it's that the top people look the other way for a variety of reasons and create an environment that allows these bullies to do what they do. Oftentimes, the reason is very opportunistic for looking the other way. It's that the bullies oftentimes are rainmakers, high achievers that bring, benefit, profit, revenue to the organization. And that's why it's often tolerated.
And I would say they appear to bring a lot of benefit to the organization. But it's only because the costs are not visible, but the costs are absolutely there. And when you actually cost it out, the people who engage in this behavior are always too costly to keep, in terms of burnout, impact on health, impact on productivity, impact on morale and engagement, impact on turnover and absenteeism and presenteeism, impact on reputational risk. Run the numbers. They're always too costly, but most organizations, of course, don't even have these numbers. I mean, they're not tracking them, and they're certainly not tracking them in the context of so-and-so brought in so much of revenue. Okay, and how many lives did he destroy, you know, in the process of bringing that revenue? Yeah.
Sue, this is really great that you're bringing up the systems, because it is true that structures, systems do drive behaviors in the environments, organizations. So as coaches, how do we identify the systems that are operating in organizations?
I don't have a good answer for that, mostly because my work at the moment has been individual, one-to-one coaching. I'm not sort of really in organizational work yet, although I'm slowly heading that way. When I started on this, I didn't want to touch it with a barge pole for obvious reasons. How do we identify it in organizations? Whenever you start seeing high turnover, would be a really, I mean, it's a late indicator. It's a late indicator. If there's one thing that targets do is they stay too long. 360s can surface it, but there are a lot of problems with 360s as well. Performance appraisals don't surface it. In fact, in most cases, performance appraisals can be weapons of choice of many of the actors. I think one of the other key ways to surface it is when you're doing those organizational climate surveys. Do you have those psychological safety type questions in there? Yeah, Robert Sutton's the no arsehole. I think Robert Sutton is the no arsehole rule, right? Yeah, the no arsehole rule. Doing those sort of pulse surveys and being intentional about what questions you're asking to surface it. But you got to be careful with that, because if there's low trust in the system, people aren't going to tell you anyway, because they know it can be held. If there has any sense that this can come back to them, they're not going to say it. So I'm not really answering your questions, but that's sort of the best I've gotten. I'm sure there's some other organizational people and HR people. I'm really happy to, you know, what are your ideas as to how you surface this more within the organization?
It's very interesting, Sue, because one of the things I immediately go to is understanding the structure of the organization. Like, what are the accountabilities and the authorities in the organization? And sometimes the actor that is creating some hostility, they're in a role where they may have a tremendous amount of authority, and they're not clear on how their team has the authority. So back to your checklist of items, one is they control all the power and they control all the information. And that's a challenge, because as coaches, we're always coaching to empower individuals, not only in their work, but also as they navigate the organization. It's Dr. Elliot Jacks is who I was trying to refer to. He is a father of organizational development. It's called Requisite Organization, and it's really powerful. And I highly encourage coaches to read up on his work, because it does give you an arsenal of tools and languages that can really help you understand what is happening from a structural or systemic perspective of organizations and how the individuals can navigate. So, Sue, we are about a few minutes out from our time. I just want to continually open up the floor. Is there any other questions that you all have?
Just pick up on one thing you said there, Aurora. I actually just finished up something called Workplace Bullying University. And the funny thing is, I have an MBA from Cornell University, and I remember this from when I went through my management training, you know, my MBA process. There's a lot of emphasis in, especially in America, on, positive management styles and, being the inclusive leader and, all of that. What we don't do much of, and where the European schools and leadership and management researchers tend to do a better job, is specifically name the bad. What does destructive leadership and management look like? What are those styles? It's like we don't talk about it. It's there. We know it exists, but we talk about it by only go, well, this is what positive and good leadership looks like. We don't actually talk about, well, what does bad leadership look like? And so then we sort of like, this is why this whole validating, it's like we're naming the wrong thing. It's like we're leaving this, because like my colleagues, and I love them, when I locally, when we were started going, it's like, you can do all the psychological safety, EQ, good leadership, management training in the world, but the people who are engaging in these behaviors don't think they need it, or they think it's BS, or they show up and it goes inward. It's like it doesn't change anything unless or until the impact of their behaviors, you're specifically making them see it. It doesn't matter what wonderful, good training you put out there. It's not going to move. This is sort of something, as you talked, it came up. Yeah.
That's great insight, Sue, that we do need to look at the difference of what good leadership is, or right leadership, or positive leadership is, and what it is not.
We all know what it isn't. It's very easy for us to list it all. But we don't specifically sort of talk about it. We just, we go, oh, well, these are how you develop these positive leadership traits. Yeah, seen a lot of that.
Sue, could you also mention to us, you've mentioned a couple of resources, so the Workplace Bullying University, for example. Thank you so much, Ludmila, for adding the Robert Sutton, the no asshole rule. Are there any other resources that you would recommend that coaches read or follow to really equip them with an understanding on how they can help their clients navigate this environment? Mm-hmm.
So Gary and Ruth Nami from a Workplace Bullying Institute, they do a survey every 3 or 4 years. Their most recent survey is done now in the pandemic, January 2021. They have some fabulous resources on the Workplace Bullying Institute page. They also have a book out, Maureen Duffy's, I'm still reading it, Mobbing. I can't remember the name. I can't remember the name of the title. The other one, it's just been revised and updated. This is more of the textbook, Bullying and Harassment in the Workplace. It's phenomenal, but it's a pretty dense read. But this is sort of like the encyclopedia, as it were. All the it's all the current research. It's phenomenal, but it's very in depth. More accessible for people to read. Valerie Cade's Bully Free Workplace, CADE. She's Canadian. She has really some accessible books. Those are the sort of the ones in the US that I'm thinking of as the ones I've used, drawn on a lot.
Those are terrific resources. Thank you, Sue. I'd like to again ask our coaches that are on the line, what are some of the other experiences that perhaps you've had, and maybe you got stuck with a client, you were coaching them and you were trying to really help them navigate the environment or the relationship in their work or perhaps in their life? What are some of the challenges that perhaps you faced as a coach?
Is that a question for me? No, it was a question to others, right?
Yeah, for our audience. Now that we have you here, Sue, we want to take advantage of the time. Yeah.
So if I may, I wanted to comment that one of the issues in this whole picture that also needs to be kept in mind is that these bullying and aggressive behaviors and this toxicity often overlaps, not completely, but to a certain extent, overlaps with psychopathology. And that's to say that it includes, and Yusu mentioned it earlier, it includes individuals who are, I'm sorry to say, not going to change. They don't want to change. They are not interested in change. They are entrenched, often have diagnosed or undiagnosed personality disorder. And we need to keep in mind what we are going up against, that this is not something, in some cases, that we can change on the side of this aggressor. On the other hand, the person who suffers from this behavior is oftentimes a person who is not equipped psychologically to be cynical enough, so to say, to understand what they are dealing with. So as a coach, we sometimes can see what they, quote unquote, should do or could do, but the client is not ready to set these boundaries or to push back real strong. So there is a real fine line, and I'm sure you will agree with this.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So much there. So yes, targets so often pro-social, but a little naive. They tend to, and this is where the Brene Brown work is being so misunderstood. They disclose way too much, way too soon, and it gets used by them. I mean, as Brene Brown will say, vulnerability moves at the speed of trust, or vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. It's like you don't go in and bare your soul and tell your boss about your alcoholic husband or your abusing brother. It's just like, no. Psychopaths in suits. Unsuccessful psychopaths are in jail. Successful psychopaths are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, is what some people would say. The current, I get a little worked up about this, but yes, our current model of Western capitalism absolutely supports this aggressive, violent, almost psychologically violent management and leadership style. It's been revered. I mean, we think about, these tycoons, the tycoons of industry and the revered leaders, but there's been a sea change. The Me Too movement, it has changed things in a wonderful way. We're seeing it right now play out in New York State. The governor, who was revered a year ago, it's now, this, very forceful personality got us through the beginning of the pandemic. But what we weren't seeing was what the cost was happening inside of his team. So there seems to have, so much there. But that's just, Ludmila, yes.
Sue, you brought up something really powerful and important. I think that as coaches, can you comment on what is our responsibility as coaches to escalate?
I'm not an internal coach, so I couldn't tell you. I have no, as an external coach when I'm working one-on-one, I have no escalatory. Of course, if I'm seeing potential self-harm, of course, then I need to address that way.
Maybe the better question is how do we approach it from a team coaching or an executive coach concept?
I would honestly want you to escalate it and use your power as the trusted third party who has no agenda other than to see everyone thrive and succeed. To use that power that you do have as the neutral third party to say, pay attention, this is what I'm seeing and observing, and walk them through the consequences. I would really encourage you to do that.
Thank you.
Because if you don't, there can be no indifference to violence. And this is psychological violence. And one is complicit. I mean, it can feel really hard. And what are our coaching ethics? But a fundamental coaching ethic is do no harm. And when we fail to state what is going on and the harm it is doing to people, we are part of the system.
So at what point do we refer to mental health in this coaching aspect when we have somebody that's coming in from bully that's that psychological trauma? Do we get them counseling early on, or do we try to minimize the impact through positive psychology before we get there?
At any stage, Roger, honestly, it's really the client. Where are they? I have people coming into me who've already been with this therapist. I have people who come to me without a therapist. I get them to say, listen, I can't be your sole source of support here. You need, and we talk through, we get them a therapist. It's like it really at any point, all the standard things of, but that is one of the things from the trauma perspective. If the bullying is severe enough and it's gone on for long enough, a coach alone is almost never going to be sufficient. They are going to need an ecosystem of support around them. They have profound healing and recovery work that they need to do. So I talk about that, you know, with some of my member clients. It's like, I can't, I've named it for a couple of them. I can't be your sole support. And I can't be the person who you're just using our sessions so that you can continue to show up to work, to continue to, you know, to just carry on going. It's like, I've had to have a very gentle, very compassionate conversation with them to say, I can't be your enabler here. This isn't why you came to me. We need to figure out, and I coach many of them to taking short-term disability. What are your options here to exit yourself from the situation? Because as soon as you can exit yourself for 2 weeks, for a month, for 6 weeks, you can start to think more clearly. That's because a lot of them, it's just like they're using, for some of them, they've used coaching just sort of like to hang in there and feel like they're not completely about to fall apart. But it's like, I'll do that for a while, but then at some point it's like, no. I cannot be the enabler here. But I do it with a lot of gentleness and with a lot of love.
Wonderful, Sue. Dorothy, did you have, yes, please share. Please share your comment.
Thank you. I'm not, like I said, I'm not sure it's really relevant, but in some ways it is from a leader standpoint and a culture I walked into over 10 years ago. It is so interesting because I worked in the education business and that, you know, that part of my life, and went back after I retired and got my life coaching. So looking at it from a different view, I work with a lot of educators, I work with a lot of church nonprofit type groups. And what I walked into was a culture of a lot of turnover, very unhappy people, you could just tell it was dysfunctional working with children. And there was this underground bullying going on by someone who would not necessarily you thought it would. And after about 6-7 months, figured out that, and I would never have known, but until this one teacher trusted me enough, and I trusted her enough that she had told me a complete lie that this person said that I had said to another teacher. And so I had a group of teachers who didn't trust this little group who were the bulliers, and another group that was just, absolutely afraid to do anything that would go against them. And as my husband calls them, the one teacher was a grenade thrower, and then just backed up and watched it happen. And that person was also related to the upper management, and which was when I made the decision to let them go. Oh, it got awful. It was awful, and I learned so much. But for the next 9 years, what was done in that environment was so much healthier. Would never have thought. And I'd worked in a lot of different places. I'd never had experienced anything like that. And so it is the trust. I just think it happens in the education, that there's so much of that in schools, this underlining going on with the educators in the classroom. So that was just my.
And I am aware, as I said to Aurora, I have a 2 o'clock coaching call. I'm in Eastern time, so I'm going to have to hop off in a minute or two. Can I just say one thing before I hop off?
Yes.
I would love it if those of you who are connected into SHRM chapters or your chambers of commerce, I'd love to come and, I want to keep on talking about this. Of course, that's part of business development for me, but also just part of awareness. So if you feel like there are any SHRM chapters or chambers of commerce or anyone who you might like to refer me to, make an introduction, I would be extremely grateful.
I want to stop our recording here, our session here, and thank everybody for your participation. Just a few words before we go. I have a couple of slides that I want to share with you regarding what's coming up next at ICF San Antonio. And so let me do that real quick. So if you enjoyed today's presentation, please keep in mind that this is our very first time that we do this as a rebroadcast. Every other Coach Connect is live. And what you see on this slide is what's coming up in August. Early August, first Thursday, 6 p.m., we have a membership orientation. So whether you're a new member or you want to learn more about the chapter, get to know us a little better, so join us for about 30 minutes on August the 4th in the evening. The very next day, we're going to have a workshop. This is presented by Terry McDougall, who is a coach who wants people not just to be successful at work, but also happy at work. And she's going to present a workshop on discovering our leadership voice. August 12th, this is our Southeast Region webinar series, Mini Habits, a Small Tool for Success with James Garrett. And on August 24th, a topic that is sort of related with what we watched today, which is how to beat burnout for yourself, your family, and your team with Stanley Ward. He's a coach from the North Texas area. And this will also be a Coach Connect, free and open to everyone. So please join us. As a reminder, we have a Wild Apricot app for our members. So when you log into this app, you're going to be able to see all the upcoming events, register, keep track of your CCUs, even connect with other people in our chapter. And if you ever miss an event, all of our Coach Connect and ACMP, that is Association for Change Management Professional partnership events, they're going to be available afterwards in YouTube and SoundCloud. All of our paid events like Coaching Excellence Series and Southeast Regional Webinar Series are available on Vimeo, and that's a subscription service. Finally, we are very, very active on social media. So follow us, comment and share on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Vimeo, Slack, and SoundCloud. And I believe this is it for today. Do we have any comments or questions from the audience? All right, Elena, we look forward to you joining us. And so hopefully you'll be able to be at our next membership orientation on August 4th. And same for you, Andy. We would love to have you on board, get to know you better, and also help you feel a member of our community and have, you know, a team and network of people that you can work with and relate to and get to know better. Okay. So, yeah. All right. Elena, welcome from Chicago, and Andy, welcome from Venezuela. And we would really love to have you on board. So more info coming up soon. You can always reach us. You can reach me personally at president2023@icfsanantonio.org or Denise at programming@icfsanantonio.org. Muchísimas gracias a ti también. All right. And Elena, you're sitting in Chicago, and Denise is in Chicago right now. And I'm going to be in Chicago early August as well.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining. And I think this, Susanna, just from my perspective, I think this worked out really well with the rebroadcast. Like Elena said, I think it would be great if we had maybe had a little more time and been able to discuss the topic. And so we'll consider that next time, adjusting the timing and being able to go in then to a deep dive. I thought it was a fascinating topic. I fortunately don't know. I've coached a lot of those, the narcissist leaders who I think sometimes it's blind spots that they just really, those behaviors are not behaviors that they see. And so it does take a lot of feedback, which is hard to give to those leaders and hard to accept. And so it takes a lot of coaching to get them from where their behaviors are natural to changing them.
And if they're willing to be coached, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So,
all right, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And we will look forward to seeing you. Bye-bye.
Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
See you soon. Hasta pronto.
Sí.